Supreme Court vacancy, the Trump travel ban, and civility in politics. I'm Donna Davis, and this is The Square Circle. Hello and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Donna Davis. Joining us today are Gregory Clay of gdclay.com, Zed Jelani of The Intercept, and Michael Schindler of Young Voices. Welcome, gentlemen.
All right.
Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy announced his retirement yesterday, giving President Trump an opportunity to fill his second vacancy on the court. Activists on the right and the left are gearing up for a major fight, as the confirmation battle this summer could determine the direction of the court for decades. Michael, how do you think this will bode for cases coming up in the next 10 years?
I think it bodes very, very well. Once we confirm basically Gorsuch 2.0, we're going to have a court that's solidly in our favor. We won't have to worry about Kennedy swinging either way. This is a good thing, and it's also I could represent the fruition of a hope that many had when they buckled down and voted for Trump. Like a lot of folks had worries, but they relied on the idea that once he was in office, he would appoint not only one but at least two solidly conservative justices, and it looks like he will.
Gregory, what do you think? What do you think of Anthony Kennedy? Will you miss him? Were you glad to see him go?
Well, Anthony Kennedy was the swing man, as we remember. To use a sports analogy, you take the NBA. A swing man in the NBA is a guy who can rotate between guard and forward. And Anthony Kennedy's situation, he rotated between the liberals and the conservatives. You know, on some issues, he was liberal, such as affirmative action, gay marriage. Other issues, he was conservative, like gun rights, allowing corporations and unions to donate as much money as they wanted to presidential campaigns, unlimited funds. But to me, the thing that I'm looking at the most is with Donald Trump. Because if Donald Trump gets his person, the person he wants confirmed, whether male or female, that's his legacy. If Trump doesn't do anything else, if he doesn't do anything else, his legacy is set, because he will forever be remembered as the president who set a solid majority conservative U.S. Supreme Court. And he would have gotten 2 nominees in his first 2 years, which is amazing. And he conceivably could have 4 in his first term. Because Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 85, Stephen Breyer is 80. And what happens if one of those retires in 2019? And what happens if Donald Trump wins re-election? You have to figure 2 of those are not going to last 2 Donald Trump terms. I mean, when Donald Trump leaves, Ruth Bader Ginsburg will be, 91, 92 years old, and Stephen Breyer will be going on 85, 86. So, if he gets his person, the one he wants, his legacy is set.
Zed, what are some of the cases that you might see being overturned over the next few years due to this?
Well, one of the big ones, which I think would motivate a lot of people on the right, has brought some more concerns for people on the liberal side of the aisle, is Roe v. Wade. Although there's some question about whether that would really be under threat. People say Justice Roberts, for instance, is more of an incrementalist. He's not necessarily someone who'd want to go and go the full hog on that. But one of the major questions is the kind of justice that replaces Kennedy. Now remember, as our other guests have said, Kennedy was sort of a swing vote. He had some sort of libertarian leanings in some ways. The question is, if you look at the composition of the current Senate, they need all 50 votes to get anyone through, right? So if there's one Republican out there who has some idiosyncrasy, they could dramatically shift who President Trump picks, and that could be Rand Paul, Rand Paul could insist on a judge that respects civil liberties, that doesn't, sort of side with the sort of the government overreach side of the court. Or he could just be someone who's kind of a rubber stamp vote. The rest of the Republicans put pressure on him. So I think somebody like him has a lot of power right now over, I guess, the course of American history for what could be 30 or 40 years, depending on how young the next judge is.
Right.
So do you think that other than Roe v. Wade, there are other cases that are really right there in the middle that could wind up being overturned? Michael, what are your thoughts?
I think that, there's Obergefell too. I think that there are a lot of folks who say that the question of marriage is right now like a settled case in like American culture. There's this notion that that a consensus has been formed, but as quick as that consensus was formed, that consensus could quickly shift. And I think there's evidence throughout not just the U.S. but the world that there's that a return to traditionalism is coming. So I think that Obergefell, among others, represents one other case, aside from like Roe v. Wade, that could be overturned if the court becomes more solidly conservative.
And tell us more about that case.
It was the one that more or less solidified gay marriage. Like in the U.S. beforehand, it had been largely a states issue. Beforehand, it hadn't been any states issue. But that was the case that really that sealed the deal, as it were.
So we're looking at personal issues in both cases. We're looking at abortion. We're looking at marriage.
Right.
These are things that really touch
Affirmative action.
affirmative action.
Right.
These are things that touch the American people right close to the heart.
Right.
Gregory, do you see any issues that are important to you that you feel like are either going to be benefited or hurt from this
You mean
court?
me personally?
Yes.
Well, I'm concerned about Roe v. Wade. There's some talk that, once the conservatives get the majority, after Donald Trump does his thing, that there will be some type of assault on Roe v. Wade. I'm hoping that the Republicans don't go there, that the conservatives don't go there. They should leave Roe v. Wade alone. Now, that's going to be interesting also because Zaid was talking earlier of how Rand Paul could have a major effect. Now, when it comes to Roe v. Wade, suppose two Republican female senators, you know what I'm talking about, Lisa Murkowski, right, Zaid, and Susan Collins. What happens if they defect, if either one of them defects, mainly because of Roe v. Wade? And I don't know why conservatives, would even still want to tackle Roe v. Wade. I mean, maybe what they are planning on doing is attacking it in a subtle way, as opposed to a whole-scale dismissal. Make some subtle changes to it. I don't know. But Roe v. Wade is going to be very interesting. I know some people are saying Roe v. Wade is going to be illegal in half the country in the next few years. We'll see.
I'd like to remind our viewers that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, or via Facebook or Twitter, and we'll answer as many as we can live on air toward the end of the show. There was another big story this week involving the Supreme Court, and the justices ruled 5-4 to uphold President Trump's travel ban. The controversial policy bans entry into the U.S. by persons from several majority Muslim countries, plus North Korea and Venezuela. Zed, what do you think about this ban?
I think on the substance, we haven't seen a whole lot of merit here. When you look at the full list of countries, I don't think we've even seen a terror case actually emanate from any individuals who migrated from those countries in decades. So I think on the substance, the ban has not really held up well. In terms of the constitutional issue, I do think there is precedence for the president to issue these sorts of bans. So maybe the court was correct on that sort of narrow ground, which they're supposed to rule. However, it does also beg the question of, should we really have an executive with that much power in the United States where the president can effectively make immigration policy? And I think some conservatives, some people on the right raised that question with President Obama and DACA. And I think some people across the spectrum are raising that question with President Trump and this ban. I mean, really, immigration policy should be Congress's prerogative. It should be a legislature's prerogative where people can have an active dialogue with their legislators about what they want immigration policy to be. But unfortunately, that's been gridlocked for so long that I think presidents kind of unilaterally, whether it be President Trump or President Obama, are trying to make that policy from the White House, which I think will have pretty unfortunate consequences for the country going forward.
I agree with that. It all depends on who's in office. When President Obama was in office, he was all for the DACA thing. Donald Trump, of course, wants to ban, whomever. But there is a precedent for this. Because remember, in 1979, when Jimmy Carter was president, remember the Iranian hostage crisis? What did Jimmy Carter do? He banned Iranians from coming into the United States. And the difference is that he imposed a ban not on religion, but on nationality. And apparently, you can bar certain nationalities from getting into the country, but you can't bar religions from getting into the country. Doesn't the Constitution and the Bill of Rights say something about there is no religious test? And so what Donald Trump did and his people did with the travel ban, because the first one he did, remember, was all Muslim countries, remember? And that created a major uproar. So what does he do? And, what does the Trump administration do with this one? They added who? North Korea and Venezuela. What do those two countries have in common? They're not Muslim-dominated countries. And I'm assuming that's why the Supreme Court, upheld it in favor of Donald Trump and his people. And Anthony Kennedy, of course, was one of the key votes, and it's probably going to be his last major ruling on the way out, leaving the Supreme Court. So I guess the key is that wording is consequential.
Michael, Zed pointed to the idea that Congress is getting hamstringed and the president is getting more powerful. Do you think that the polarity that is going on right now between Democrats and Republicans is having an effect where it actually gives more power to the president?
I don't think that the president has gained substantially in power over the last, say, 20 years with regard to immigration policy or national security, especially since 9/11, the prerogative of the president with regard to national security has been especially strong. We've seen a lot of executive orders and proclamations like the travel ban go into effect, and oftentimes they serve a very crucial purpose. They in effect allow the government to act faster than it would were Congress or the Senate to try to put together legislation and have to vote on it. Whereas Congress has to sit around and mull something over and try to get enough votes for something and I can wait for it to pass to the Senate. The president can just proclaim something. And if that thing is in the interest of national security, then it's absolutely vital that that happens very quickly. And I think that that's a good thing.
Executive privilege.
Mm.
Right.
Well, that's what we say. Dictatorships are very efficient, right? When the Chinese want to build a dam in a town and people are living there, they can, the leader just says, we're going to do it. But in our system, we have checks and balances. And I think the erosion of those have concerned both conservatives and liberals at different points in our history. And I think that's a big part of the American tradition that we should be wary about.
When we stop electing our presidents, then I'll say, perhaps we have a dictator. But until then, I think that we're quite safe.
Do you think there are any ways that we can make the president have less ability to make these kinds of decrees?
Well, one is that I think Congress never debated the travel ban. The Republicans would never allow a real debate or vote on the actual ban, but Congress could theoretically overrule the ban. They could say it is the policy of the United States that we are not going to prohibit people for a certain amount of months from certain nationalities.
Right.
But Congress, and that's why the entire blame is not just on Trump. A lot of the blame is on the people running Congress because they do have the power to assert themselves here, and they just choose not to for political reasons.
They won't do it, right?
Which is very unfortunate.
Right, and they probably don't want to do it because of the midterm elections coming up. I mean, I doubt any of the Republicans want to be viewed publicly as going counter to Donald Trump. It might cost them their state elections, and they have something to fight for also. They want to stay in office. That's why it's really interesting. Whenever Donald Trump does something crazy, et cetera, or controversial, you notice many Republican representatives and senators will say, they always use the same terminology. Well, what he did was disturbing. What he did was controversial. What he did should have consequences. They say all that, but you notice they don't do anything about it. You notice that? And it shows you that deep down, they are trying to basically keep in line with Donald Trump, because they're concerned about their own constituencies and the red states. And, that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump wields so much power.
So in effect, after the midterm elections, do you think that it might come up that Congress might try to take action against this travel ban?
Oh, I mean, I think the Democrats take over the chambers. I think there's going to be some major changes going on, major changes.
And finally, political civility was in the spotlight this week as White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was asked to leave a restaurant due to her work for President Trump. Congresswoman Maxine Waters called for more of such episodes. Here's the footage.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
Gregory, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, Maxine Waters is crazy as hell. What's going to happen if she goes into a restaurant and someone on the right or a conservative Republican says, hey, we want her out of here? How's she going to feel then? And all this stuff about confronting people in restaurants, and Kirsten Nielsen was confronted at the Mexican restaurant on 14th Street, downtown Washington, right beside the Hamilton restaurant. And Stephen Miller was confronted in another Mexican restaurant over by the Washington Convention Center. Sarah Sanders, of course, at the Red Hen restaurant in Lexington, Virginia. Now, all this restaurant stuff and public accommodation stuff is dangerous because it reminds me of the civil rights movement. Why do I say that? Because I remember when black folk could not go into certain restaurants or certain hotels or certain water fountains and all that. And this confronting people and throwing people out and all this stuff is ridiculous because it reminds me when I was growing up. Because I remember those days. I remember the colored and white signs and restrooms, et cetera, et cetera. And that was only 50 years ago. And what these people are doing, especially Maxine Waters, about confronting people, she's doing it in a reverse way, But be careful what you ask for because what goes around can come around like the so-called boomerang theory, the boomerang principle, and come back and haunt her, So what is she going to do then?
Michael, do you think it's right for us to be looking at the personal lives of our politicians and affecting them in such a personal way?
I think that at some points it may be necessary to publicly shame a person, to publicly say, you know what, I don't want to do business with you. But on the other hand, that's not a good way of convincing them that you're right or convincing them that your point of view is the right point of view. If anything, it's going to incense them. On a side note, I'd like to say that our reaction shouldn't be to this, that restaurant owners shouldn't be allowed to do this. That would be an assault on the freedom of association. What we should say is that this is rude and incivil, and perhaps the Red Hen isn't the best place to go.
The Red Hen isn't the best place to go? For whom?
To go to for anyone, because this is a place that encourages incivility. This isn't a place that encourages dialogue. This isn't a place that encourages peace. This is a place where if you disagree with somebody else, you're unwelcome. And I think that's a bad institution to have in a neighborhood.
Zed, what are your thoughts?
Well, my day job is I do reporting, so I talk to all kinds of politicians, some of whom tend to be on the other side of the ideological spectrum of me. And I think as a rule, I don't really go into their personal lives. If I see them with their families, I don't really bother them or anything like that. And I think That's basically because in our society, we have to have certain norms of how we deal with people we disagree with. That doesn't mean you don't care about the underlying issue. It just means that you respect the human being, right? You may hate the sin of what they're doing, but you don't hate the sinner. You don't hurt the person. So that's generally the rule I follow. But in terms of the practical politics of it, I do think this probably made Sarah Huckabee Sanders more sympathetic. It probably made the Trump administration more sympathetic. It kind of made liberals look like jerks a little bit to a lot of people. And I think, if I was the Red Hen owner, I probably would have just walked over there and had a conversation with her, maybe said, hey, you want to talk about some of these policies, maybe even record it on video, put it on YouTube. I think people would have really respected them for that, and they could have really hashed out their differences in that way. Doing it in this way, it just polarized people, and now everyone's debating whether or not you can throw someone out of a restaurant. They've forgotten about the immigration, the kids, the border, all that's all out the door. Everyone's just debating whether you can throw someone out of a restaurant, which doesn't seem very productive to me. So,
Michael is right. It's crazy. Because it can backfire you. Furthermore, what happens if you throw out someone and you have one fool in the crowd? It only takes one. And that fool has a gun, starts shooting. Next thing you know, you got a massacre at a restaurant or a hotel or whatever. And who's going to be charged with inciting a riot then? Okay? Is Maxine Waters going to be charged with something? And you get into all these other ancillary issues, because this situation has major tentacles, and who's going to be playing the role of the instigator, and the catalyst for all this? I mean, right now it's looking like Maxine Waters. That's why I said earlier that she's crazy as hell, because she could be creating not only incivility, but bodily harm. And someone could get killed because right now the country is such at a fever pitch on both sides. Liberals are angry, conservatives are angry, this person, that person, angry. It only takes one fool to do something crazy, and either blow up something or shoot 10 or 12 people, in a public facility, and then you have another mass, massacre, another mass shooting, et cetera, like what happened at the Capital Gazette newspaper in Annapolis, Maryland, on Thursday.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. Sandra Collier has asked, if the travel ban is really a Muslim ban, then wouldn't we expect to see a ban on travelers from Indonesia, the largest Muslim majority country? Zed, I'll throw this one at you.
Well, one, I don't think it's strictly a ban on Muslims. I don't think that's accurate. However, we have to remember that during the campaign, Trump did say that's what he wanted to do. And I think that's part of the motivation for doing this, is that he's trying to deliver something for his base. He said he was going to ban every Muslim. He didn't do that, but he did ban some countries. And like I said, there really isn't a whole lot of merit to the ban. A number of these countries are our allies. A number of these countries that we've never seen anyone actually generate a terror case from there in the United States or for decades. So yeah, I do think the viewer is correct. It's not a ban on all Muslims, but it is motivated, I think, by some level of resentment towards Muslims, because that's why he said it on the campaign trail, and that's what he's trying to deliver in this promise, even though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on the substance.
Michael, what are your thoughts?
I think that if we wanted to ban, or rather if Trump wanted to ban Muslims, then he could have banned like Saudi Arabia, but he didn't. In fact, we have very close and friendly relations with Saudi Arabia. Instead, what he did was, hey, folks from Iran and North Korea and Venezuela and a variety of countries can't come over here because we're not sure that the authorities over there are vetting the folks they send over here. And that's perfectly fine. It's a valid security risk, even if it's been sort of exaggerated a bit. Nobody has a right to come and visit us. It's a privilege to come here, and it's the president's prerogative to set limits and institute bans, just as the one that he just did.
And so you think the fact that Indonesia is not on the travel ban list is neither here nor there?
It's not a big thing. I wouldn't make a deal out of it.
I wonder more so about Saudi Arabia, like you were saying earlier. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't most of the hijackers, September 11th, come from one key country? Wasn't that Saudi Arabia?
It was.
Yeah. So why not Saudi Arabia? I mean, I thought, because this entire terrorism situation, the way it's been amped up and ramped up and everything, was instigated by what? September 11th. So you would think logically that Saudi Arabia would be on the list, but it's not.
Well, to get to that point, not to defend the travel ban or Trump too much, the worry is that the countries on the list aren't doing an appropriate job of vetting the folks they send over here, or make sure that folks who ought not be going over here come here. With Saudi Arabia, we have a very, very close security and economic relationship at this point.
Right. It's about the money, in other words.
Well, not just money. I think that we actually do have a close relationship, and we can trust them. And they do worry about, like for example, like business going back and forth. Like a lot of their businessmen come to the U.S. and a lot of ours go.
Right.
I go to them.
Plus,
so
Saudi Arabia has a lot of investments in the United States.
Yeah, that's perfectly valid.
Right.
Alrighty, and from Luther Burns. If it's okay for Maxine Waters supporters to harass Trump officials, is it okay for Trump supporters to harass Maxine Waters?
That's the thing. That's what I was saying earlier. Yeah, I answered this question earlier. You know, what happens when someone goes after Maxine Waters? You know what's going to happen? It's going to become a huge racial issue. Guarantee, capital G, a huge racial issue. Because you know damn well Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, NAACP, et cetera, are going to come to her defense and claim that she's being pursued by a bunch of vicious racists. And they'll say it's uncalled for, she shouldn't be harassed in a restaurant or a hotel or whatever. But as I said before, be careful what you ask for, because of the boomerang theory and principle. It can come back to haunt you.
Do you think she sees herself as invulnerable because of the race issue?
Yeah. I think she's using that as basically her cover. Yeah, that's her basic cover.
Okay, and now it's time for the most underreported story of the week. Who would like to start?
I can start. So if you go to The Intercept, we did a lot of coverage of this. Some other websites did as well. We saw a very senior Democrat lose their re-election this week. Joe Crowley in New York's 14th district in New York City. He outspent his opponent 10-1. His opponent, who was victorious, was 28 years old. She's a young Latina woman. She identifies as a democratic socialist. She's an organizer. Her parent, one of her parents came from Puerto Rico. She was working class in the Bronx. Everyone wrote her off. Everyone said she had no chance. And yet, with strong organizing, she defeated one of the most powerful Democrats in the House of Representatives. And I think that goes to show you can't really write anyone off. If someone's smart, if they're willing to put in the work, if they're willing to organize, and they have a strong message that resonates with enough people, they can win their election.
That's exciting. What about yourself, Greg?
I would say, well, it's partly covered a lot, but it's probably not covered enough. The Jameis Winston case in the NFL. If you don't know what's happening in the NFL, but Jameis Winston is the quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The NFL announced that Jameis Winston on Thursday was officially suspended for 3 games for a sexual assault case. He groped an Uber driver. Now the issue is this. The NFL's new policy about sexual assault, domestic violence, that grew out of the Ray Rice controversy, is that first-time offender should get 6 games suspension. Jameis Winston only got 3. Question is, why, how, what happened? To me, it sounds like the NFL cut a plea bargain with Jameis Winston, and there are many questions that need to be asked and answered. What happened? What happened between 6 games and 3 games? At some point, somebody has to come clean and tell us what went on. Was it really some kind of a settlement or plea bargain, et cetera, et cetera? Hopefully we'll find out at some point.
I wonder if this is the end of that story. Michael, what's your most underreported story of the week?
Sure. So earlier today, the NSA announced that pursuant to the 2015 USA Freedom Act, that they were bulk deleting masses and masses and masses of call records, which is a wonderful thing. Beforehand, they had accumulated just tons and tons of private records of citizens, and now, thanks to hard work of Congress and privacy advocates there, they're deleting tons of stuff, and they're actually having a lot of trouble figuring out just how to delete this much stuff. But yeah, this represents a great boon to privacy advocates throughout the U.S.
All right, that's all for this week. I'm Donna Davis. Thanks for watching The Square Circle. We'll see you next week.